So last week we prepped for we crossed the Jordan River. We are officially in the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. Today, we're talking about Jericho and what actually happens with the Battle of Jericho. So a little while, or when we started the book of Joshua, I gave you a few questions, and I want these in our head for today. I don't want to answer them immediately. I just want us thinking about them at the start. The first question is this fact, or is this propaganda, or is this legend? The question of should this story be read as a history book, or if it's not history, what is it saying? Who is doing the fighting? Who is doing the action? And what is required of the people? Thinking about who is actually responsible for what at what process in the story, and how well are the people doing what they are told to do? So those are kind of the questions we set up at the original, at the outset. Just keep those in mind, and let's actually talk about Jericho and what's actually happening. This is one of those that I believe we are finally hitting a Sunday school story with coloring pages. First question for you all actually to answer: is this what you remember from Sunday school, or the songs and things?
I don't. The only thing I remember about Jericho is the spiritual or the hymn.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho.
Yeah.
Jericho is pretty.
Dig it for you.
I think it's pretty weird.
Okay.
I used to love the story when I was in Sunday school. I thought it was a great story, and I still think it's a great story.
Okay. Any reason in particular that you liked this one?
Well, I don't know. It just sort of brought it back, how they managed to march around the city and bring it down. It just was like a big hurrah when they did it.
All right.
I always also wondered how sound came into it.
Oh, okay. That's a great question. Like, what's the deal with sound? Because there's a lot of sound-based warfare going on.
The one of the things that I wondered about was, I found it hard to believe they forgot to circumcise the men for 40 years.
So there's the part that was left out of the story, which is in the Sunday school version, which is the preparation before going in. We can touch on that as well. Any other initial thoughts for reading this for the
as I remember as a child, hearing that story, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, 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 Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. You'd think, if that really happened, that is sort of a miracle of some sort. It couldn't happen today. I mean, nobody's going to run around the city with a trumpet and have anything happen other than they'd probably get arrested, But, it sort of gives to a child a affirmation of the power of God. God made the walls of this city come crumbling down. So he must be all powerful.
Well,
I wondered though if the footsteps that they marched around the city with all those soldiers would have been a rhythmic march, and I mean that can bring down a bridge. So I think it could weaken the walls if they did that 7 times around, or maybe he did more even. that would weaken the wall so that when they finally shouted, that was the last straw for those poor walls. They couldn't take it anymore.
All right, so this is
Also, maybe those walls were not that strong to begin with.
so let's start with geography first. So we have a mental image of what this is looking like, because Helen, I'm with you with what I thought a walled city looked like, and then I pulled up some images and not at all what what I was imagining when I was thinking of a walled city. So let me give me 2 seconds. All right. Whoop. Let me just get myself around so I can actually do this. Here we go. So this is a digital rendition of what they think the walls of Jericho look like. So you can see there is an inner city and an outer city. The outer city, if you can kind of tell by the relief here, Jericho is built on a hill. So there's a certain point where, like, there's a little bit where the wall is supported by these pillars, but the base of the wall here is actually built into the hill itself. And same for like the upper city. All right, these pictures are not in order, so, oh, here we go. The one I needed was right afterwards. This is the archaeological dig of the remainder of Jericho. So you can still see that like incline here, that would have been the base of the wall, and then up here being more where the city is, or that the inner city being. And so we kind of can see the outline of where the walled city of Jericho was. Those are some. So this is kind of using a modern day Google Maps image and then plopping the digital rendering on top of it. They can kind of tell some of these buildings, which archaeology, I find it fascinating. You can see similar sized buildings over here because Jericho today is inhabited. But you can also see that there is green all around it. So this is a lush, fertile area. I learned that there's actually a specific type of date that like this one breed of date, this one type of date only grows in Jericho, and people in Jericho are very picky about their dates, and they will only eat Jericho dates. So that just goes to show, like, this is a prime location, and it's probably because of the proximity to the Jordan River that, like, you get a little further away and it gets arid really quickly, but there is lush greenland around it. This is a quick depiction of just, I am now seeing this up close. This is an inaccurate depiction because they have the wrong type of horns there. So we're going to ignore that one. Let's see. Whoop. There was one more picture I wanted to share. Give me just a moment to set that one up. All right, because this one kind of is a close-up of the actual wall itself. So you can see the slope of it, where you can really see like this earthen wall. So this part of the wall is basically built into the mountain, and then like so that's like the retaining wall. If you think about, like, if you've seen gardens where there's like that slope and lots of people put rock or ground cover to make it stable, that's what that is. Whereas like this is the wall that is built on top that has room on either side, and then you have the upper inner wall that protects like basically the rich people. So this is more of like your commoner area, and this is your rich person area. And they are marching down and around the base of the retaining wall. And this is just one more depiction of how much of a fortress this could have looked like. With cities like this, it was very common that everyone lived inside of the walled city. There probably would have been wells and a water source inside the cities. And then every day the gates would open up and you would be able to farm and go into the fields. Basically, you didn't want to be outside the walls at night unless you were paid to or had to be. And it also seems in the research I was doing that Jericho may have been the first walled city that they can find archaeological evidence for going back to 9,000 BCE, which is pretty darn old.
PC.
The thing about it is widely confirmed that by the time this story is supposedly taking place, the walls had already been toppled. And so that's why there's a question of folklore of, does this remember a battle? Was this myth kind of incorporated into the Israelite tradition when it actually happened slightly different? There's a lot of questions around it. But knowing all that, how does the kind of the image of the walls and kind of that earthworks around it, does it change your image of how this happens?
Yeah.
So like, what's different than like marching, or like the wall that is next to me right now is just brick going up from the ground, which is more of like what I thought. With the earthworks, does it kind of change what's toppling down?
Mhm.
Yeah, having it built into the mountain the way it was before, then it came up like this, you wouldn't be toppling that part, you'd just be toppling what was above that. And then there's another wall to deal with, so they don't talk about the second wall.
Yeah. Gary, did you have a thought?
Yeah, my vision is that a portion of the wall came down to give them access to the city, and thus the story is recorded that the walls, like all, the picture of all the walls come.
Yeah, well, really, you just need like some access points for
Right.
the city.
And
Yeah.
that could be recorded as the walls came down, and they entered the city, and then as it gets recorded that the folk aspect of it makes it much more interesting, exciting fairy tale, or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah, Larry?
Well, they had to breach both walls. So even though maybe only an opening was created in each, the walls, because there were two, did come tumbling down.
Yeah,
Even though it wasn't the whole thing.
Yeah.
that's how it could be plural.
But we do know that at some point in history, the walls did come down because Jericho stopped being a walled city at a certain point. That said, Jericho was inhabited even after the walls came down. So that's one of the interesting things is Jericho was likely inhabited. So there's a lot of questions around how scripture meets archaeology. So let's start at the beginning. Let's actually, with that setup in mind, let's kind of talk about the setup before we get to the actual battle itself. So Sue, as you mentioned, I think it was, we have to do some preparation before battle. And one of the issues evidently is that they weren't keeping up all of the traditions they were supposed to in the wilderness. I don't know about you, but I panicked when it first said that they had to recircumcise everyone. It turns out that it was simply the fact that the nation had to be recircumcised because they had not been keeping up that tradition in the wilderness.
Makes sense, because I thought they'd already been circumcised, and I wondered what they were cutting.
That was my worry as well, because that's not a fun process.
Okay.
It'd be pretty hard to get volunteers for that army.
Right. In reading the notes, one of the things that's specified is that you have to be circumcised in order to celebrate the Passover. And so one of the important things is that they're doing the Passover, they're celebrating the Passover, which evidently also wasn't really celebrated in the 40 years in the wilderness. So they're doing this big celebration in the Holy Land, or in the Promised Land, and they're basically doing doing some like sanctified holy things before actually doing the battle.
you wonder kind of what was going on in that 40 years. Were they just walking around sulking?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You literally get the Levitical law that says like celebrate this so your children learn and your children's children learn, and then they immediately don't celebrate it for 40 years.
Oh, well.
Oh well, so they celebrate. Part of this is likely to once again become holy because they're going to be interacting with the Ark of the Covenant. So kind of like before when the priest had to do extra rituals in order to carry it, they are doing extra things to basically be holy enough to interact and march with the Ark of the Covenant here.
Mhm.
So it is then said that when the people when they are getting, oh, actually pause. So let's see, any questions about the circumcision or the celebration of the Passover?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to talk about Jacob's vision there where he sees this general
Yeah.
with the sword? Okay.
Yeah, in just a moment. The other thing that I think is interesting about this transition of being in the Holy Land, I keep saying Holy Land, the Promised Land, is in verse 12, we get a very important fact, which is showing the transition of this people and their status. Chapter 5, verse 12 says, the manna ceased on that day,
Oh.
and the produce of the and on that day they ate the produce of the land, and the Israelites no longer had manna. They ate the crops of the
Yeah.
Canaanites that year.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really big moment where like they are eating the fruit of the land and no more manna. Manna is done.
Have they been eating manna for 40 years?
Mhm.
Now, did they eat anything else?
It's like manna and quail is all we're given record of.
Yeah.
Well, they're the livestock.
They did have their livestock, and so it's kind of assumed they had some things to eat,
Mhm.
but they are switching from a nomadic diet to an agrarian
Oh.
diet.
Okay.
And it's one of the things that it also shows like a sense of ownership already. If you are just going to go into lands, and it kind of assumes that they're going to like reap, harvest, and eat stuff as they go along. When they like come to an area, they cross the Jordan River and they're eating Jericho's food.
Mhm. Mhm.
And to me, that's quite a bold statement for an army to just come in and be like, oh, thanks for the crops.
Yeah.
Anyways, and so that brings us to Joshua's vision, where Joshua gets up early in the morning and sees a man standing before him. Just looks like a man to Joshua, and he asks whether this man is for them or against them. And we find out that this is actually an angelic commander of God's heavenly hosts.
Mhm.
And the commander instructs Joshua to remove his sandals, for he is standing on holy ground.
Holy ground. Yeah.
So I'm curious if this scenario sounds like a few others that we read, because it has echoes of a few other stories.
Hmm.
Well, Moses had to do that
Right.
when he was on holy ground.
So what does it, if Joshua is doing something similar to Moses, what does that indicate anything to the reader?
Continuity.
It kind of proves that like Joshua is his successor, because Joshua's doing the same thing as Moses.
Right.
So there's another funny story that this has a little bit of similarities to, which is, I think I noticed just because I like, it's one of my favorite stories. Do you remember the story of the guy riding the donkey and encountering an angel with the sword, but the guy doesn't see it and the donkey does?
Yeah.
Numbers. Yeah.
So this time it's the reverse, where Joshua evidently is holy enough and paying attention enough that when he is confronted by a man with a sword, he's like, oh, hey, what's going on here? Rather than Balaam, who doesn't see it and is annoyed at his donkey for perceiving it. This is, once again, this is an inverse of that, where we get that Joshua, pretty good dude.
Good as the donkey.
Yeah. So with this little story dropped in here right before the battle actually happens, what is this indicating in the story? Like, why does it matter that Joshua perceives an angelic commander right before they go and do the rest of the story? Like,
Yeah.
what's the purpose? Yeah, Larry?
Well, maybe it's so you can say promised land or holy land, that the promised land has now become holy.
There is that.
Well, I think God's been very active recently anyway, but it does seem to put an exclamation point, they make sure we've missed that. God is very much present.
Yeah.
And
So
he's
not
got
only is God
sword.
present, who else is present? So it's God and God's army.
Yeah.
And that's important, where it's not just like the deity is there. The deity, the commander, the soldiers that the commander commands, like the heavenly host, we talk about that and we're like, oh yes, all of the angels. No, this is like God and God's army is here. So why does it matter that not just God is here, but God and God's army is here?
It probably shows a lot of strength and power, and it's showing all of God's power right there, with hoping to, I mean, not hoping, but almost guaranteeing success.
Does it emphasize emphasizes that this is truly their goal and this is the promised land? And also, since it's a military person with a sword, he's not carrying a peace sign, he's carrying a sword. They kill everybody in Jericho, including the animals. And I don't understand why they kill the animals, but
so hold on to that thought. We'll talk about that aspect of it in a moment.
Okay.
So hold on to the thought of the heavenly commander as well. We're going to put a few pins in it and then we're going to connect some dots. So we have the heavenly commander here, we have the holiness of the land, and then Joshua is given the actual instructions of what they're going to do. So I had to read it a few times and look at the notes to find out the order of people and what's going to happen. But the instructions are, there's going to be a group of armed men, then a group of 7 priests blowing trumpets, which are, if you've seen the shofar, they are the ram's horn. That is why the picture with the silver trumpets is entirely inaccurate. These are big old ram's horns that if you just have to cut off the end of it and you can use it as a horn, and they are very loud. And so you're going to have 7 priests blowing the horns continuously, and then you're going to have the Ark of the Covenant, and then you're going to have the rear guard of all the rest of your soldiers. The instruction is walk around the city once for 6 days. The people are not to say anything, but you're going to be blowing the horns continuously for that 1 lap, and then you're done. And then on the 7th day, you're going to walk around the city 7 times, blowing the horns continuously. And then when that is done, everyone's going to give a big old shout and the walls are going to fall down. So that is the instruction of what to do. So, normal instructions for a military or not normal instructions for a military? What about this is unusual?
Everything.
All right.
They don't really attack, they just keep walking around. So that seems kind of odd.
Mm-hmm.
And the soldiers don't do anything other than yell along with the rest of the populace, I gather. The priests are blowing the trumpets, and the townspeople are the ones that are supposed to shout.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it had the people of Jericho just nervous wrecks, listening to that noise and knowing that they're eventually going to get them.
So let's talk about the people inside the city. So the point of a walled city is you can't get me. We have everything we need in here. The theory of a walled city is it is basically a game of chicken. Who's going to break first? Are you going to get tired and go away? Or are we going to starve inside? The thing is, normally, what is happening with a walled city is like the soldiers are building like earthenworks. They're either trying to topple the walls. The Romans would build a ramp so they can just like get over the walls, and then the walls are not a problem. People are normally doing something, and the people inside are waiting. But here, the people, once a day, they're hearing a bunch of horns go around and then nothing. What are you thinking if you're inside and for 6 days you're hearing this army walk around your city, make a bunch of noise, and then nothing for the rest of the day?
They're not really serious about attacking, I guess. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. They're evidently nervous enough because they are hiding inside when, or they wall themselves inside when they saw the Jordan dry up. They're like, we're not dealing with these people. Go, come on, everyone in the city. We're just gonna stay here until they go away. Gary, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think they probably half of them died of anxiety attacks. So.
Right. Like, you can tell this group is doing something weird. It's like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
Like, they're proving they can circle us, but like, why? So Helen, one of your initial questions was about sound.
Yeah, well, I was thinking how the rhythmic sound of marching around the city would probably weaken the walls eventually. So that there's some place or other it's going to come down, or there have at least some kind of a breach.
So there's another aspect to sound when it relates to the Israelites' God. And I want you to think about how the world was created in their creation story. In the beginning, everything was dark, and then what happened?
So God created day and night, or?
Yes, but how did God create?
Let there be light.
God said.
His word.
So there's an aspect where the act of creation is actually auditory, where there is an aspect of sound that is connected to both creation and destruction. And so here they're making sound kind of like their God created sound to create the world. There is that connection there. So that's one of the reasons why they estimate like the horns and everything. It is because that's kind of what their God does.
I don't know this for sure, but a chapter or two back, wasn't there something about the Canaanites knowing that Israelites are already in the area and they're getting pretty scared?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So the people are scared because this group of people is like, why they can't, it's not like this is a massive army. but they're getting to be really successful in what they're
Mhm.
doing, which is frankly terrifying.
Mhm.
So
The-
the question is, who
the
is
fact
doing what? Go for it, Gary.
Well, the fact that they were aware of them crossing the Jordan, just
Mhm.
walking right across, is pretty scary. Now they're walking around our city.
Uh-huh.
You know, so what's going to happen to our city? The the Jordan just dried up, separated, and they let them walk across.
Mhm.
Mhm. So the question is, are the people successful because of what they are doing?
Mm.
Are the Israelites winning these battles because they have the best warriors, they've had the best training, they have the best weaponry, they are the strongest army? Are they winning because their fighters are good?
No, I think they're winning because they have a faith in God that God's going to help them.
So I would say take it one step back. So it's like, yes, they have faith in God. But what does that faith in God mean? Who is doing the actual like acting in this story?
God.
God is. God is winning the battles, and this is important going forward, which is why I'm making a big fuss of it. The people are not winning because they are good. They are winning because they are chosen and they are faithful.
Hmm.
So why does it make a difference that these are not the best warriors, they are chosen?
Ooh.
Uh, Well, first you have to believe that that is the way they are winning. That is the reason that they are winning.
Mhm.
And if God says so, then it's so.
Yeah.
Mhm. So what happens if they start thinking they're winning because of their own power?
They lose, they fail.
The locusts are coming.
So
If they
this
break
is
the laws, that God punishes them.
Yeah.
That's the end of what they're trying to do. They can't do it.
Mhm. This becomes a major theme that Israel is not the best of all nations. They are a chosen nation, and that is different. They are not successful because they are good, because they're the best at business, because they're the best at farming. It's not their power that is doing these things. It is purely God's effort on their behalf. So this whole setup, it's not that the people are walking around the city. It's that, remember, if you can envision God standing on the Ark of the Covenant, they're marching their warrior God, literally surveying the city 6 times. The heavenly host is there. So it's not that the people are fighting the battle, the heavenly host are going around with them. It is the heavenly host that is assumed to be the ones toppling the city. There is an army doing work. It's just not the people. It is God and the spiritualization of all of this. It's not that the people are good, it's that they are chosen.
And I never heard it described exactly that way. So why were they chosen? Does anyone know? Just a luck of the draw, or
Why were they chosen?
yeah, it's interesting. It's like being the favorite child in a family. I just read an article about that in the paper. It's a mixed bag. I don't, but they are. Israel now is secular.
Mhm.
Uh,
So putting aside, we're gonna put on hold the modern Israel. That's a different conversation.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just.
It's all good. I don't blame you for making the connections here. That is understandable. But
Yeah.
thinking back in the story, like think back to all the way through Genesis, how did this group of people get their chosen status?
Yeah. Well,
So
by
actual question, like,
by obeying God's rules.
Yeah.
Because when they deviated from them, they got into deep trouble.
So you have the chosen status in some ways goes to the wilderness, where they created this special set of covenants and rules. So what predates the wilderness?
Slavery.
Yep, so slavery in Egypt. And so how did their elect status get chosen out of Egypt? What's at the beginning of the book of Exodus? Do you remember why God pays attention to them?
Well, they kept complaining a lot.
God hears their cries in the wilderness and remembers their covenant.
Yeah.
So what covenant are they remembering?
The Noah? Is it Noah?
So
Okay.
there's Noah, so that's the Noahic covenant is the oldest, and that's seen to be for all humanity. So yes, and what's
okay.
between Exodus and Noah? There's one more big one in between. What's the covenant that that God remembers?
Must Abraham?
Abraham. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is Abraham's elect status that Abraham was a good dude and God made promises to Abraham. And that's how they're getting their elect status. It goes straight back to him.
So in a way, have the Israelites sort of earned this exalted status to the point now when they're winning big league? This is the first really big league win that the Israelites have had. The rest of their lives, they've all been suffering. First as slaves in Egypt, then 40 years out in the desert. I mean, that they don't sound like the chosen people. They sound like they're having a tough time, just existing. But are they earning something, or it just suddenly seems a little incongruous that all of a sudden God says, hey, you've made it, you're here, you're going to win, you're going to kill everybody, you're going to take over the whole business here.
I mean, so what do you all think? Are they earning their special status, or are they living out the promise of their special status?
But I don't think they're earning it, because they're very mixed bag kind of people. I mean, they almost immediately start disobeying the rules in chapter 8. So it's well, I guess maybe Kelvin was right. You don't have to, you can't earn it. You just happens. But the 40 years in the wilderness was primarily a punishment. They got to the promised land really fast at first, and then so they got themselves punished. I guess they were ready, and it was a new generation completely, except for Moses.
Yeah, so the 40 years was kind of time out for them. They weren't ready yet. So, but theoretically, if they came out of Egypt ready to be a people, they could have gotten to this point a lot faster. So going back to Abraham, do you all remember why Abraham got this special status with God?
Because he obeyed. Well, I don't know if it happened because he obeyed God and was willing to kill his son.
Just kill his son.
Or was it something?
It goes back before that. So there is many times where Abraham is tested and shown to be righteous. Abraham's willing to follow exactly what God says.
Okay.
but there's a few other pieces that happened prior to that. The covenant predates that, basically.
Hmm.
So the first, anyone remember? I know this is going way back for some previous Bible studies here. So there's two big things. So Abraham initially listens to God and makes a big old trek from basically way over in like the east side of what's modern day Iraq, makes the trip over to the land of Canaan like God tells him to do. And the initial covenant that God makes with Abraham is, you are going to be blessed to be a blessing. You are going to have this elect status, but that's purely because I want to share the goodness, my goodness with the world, but you're kind of going to be the conduit for that.
Okay.
That blessed to be a blessing goes with the covenant the whole way through. So theoretically, Israel is being set up as a holy nation to live out the Israel is blessed, but they are blessed in order to be a blessing.
Hmm.
Whether or not that is happening at the moment is a different question. But that is theoretically, the elect status is not just because God has a favorite. But we see this kind of carried through the tradition of Jesus, where Jesus is God's only son, but also is a servant of the people. God, or Jesus comes to serve, but also has elect status. And so that is kind of seen as a modeling of this covenant where, yeah, they're a special group of people, but they're actually supposed to help everyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyways, let's go back to the story. So, seventh day, they blow the trumpets. The walls evidently fall down either entirely or they're able to be breached. And here's where the people actually are given action. The walls falling down is not the people's doing, it is God's doing. But then they're told to go into the city. There is specific instructions to find Rahab. Go find her. We're going to honor that one. Get her family out of the city. And then kill and burn everything. And I know this sounds horrific in our modern day sense. Kill young, old, human, animal, and no one gets any of the gold, silver, or bronze that's going to go into the treasury. All of this is to be sacrificed. And the question is, why? Why completely annihilate Jericho? You don't even get to eat the animals and you don't get to keep their stuff. Why do this?
You get their gold and silver.
The people don't, though.
Oh, okay.
Goes into the treasury. That means it's God's. Larry?
Well, it shows that now the Israelites have sole and complete control of things. The opposition has been done away with. So God has delivered. They have it. It's all theirs.
But you would think that, like, if you want complete control of the land of this area, why would you burn their stuff? Why would you kill the animals? Why would you not take the people who, like, okay, kill the soldiers, but why don't you keep the women and children to be servants? Why kill everybody?
Well, for the same reason Hitler killed all the Jews. His idea was to eliminate them from the face of the earth. And that perhaps was the modus behind this.
So
Well, yeah.
there is an aspect of that. If the people are no longer alive, they can't tempt Israel into worshiping false gods. There is an aspect of that. I saw Sue, Helen, after Sue, you can talk, just know that you're on mute. So Sue, you first.
So they can't say that there was a personal interest in anything these people had, that it was completely because they are chosen people and they didn't wanted, they're not plundering. They're not plundering. They're
So they're not beholden to anyone.
No, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, yeah. Helen, what was your thought?
Well, I think it's probably the same as somebody just mentioned. I think it would corrupt their own faith, possibly. That anybody that was left would not be worship the same God, or wouldn't be worshiping, and then I think they could possibly be convinced to be sinful, although that wasn't in their mind at the time, probably.
Except for the animals.
Yeah.
Well, the animals too, yeah. Well, maybe there were different animals. Maybe there were pigs.
Any other thoughts on this?
They may just want to start clean and keep Israel pure and not to have the mixture of those that they've taken over, and even the livestock.
Mhm. So there is one other element that I don't think we're gonna guess, but this is found in the Hebrew words that is used. So if don't know why my camera went off there. All right. So remember how the firstborn son of every family has like special status, and we have the almost sacrifice of Isaac, and instead you have to do like extra sacrifices to redeem the firstborn because the firstborn belongs to God. And you're supposed to sacrifice the first animal that is born of any, like if a sheep has its first set of lambs, you're supposed to sacrifice to God the first lamb that comes out. And when you grow crops, you're supposed, the first of the harvest isn't yours. You dedicate it to God at the temple as a burnt offering, and that's considered a first fruits offering. Is this all sounding familiar?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Jericho is the first city they are conquering. So in the same way that this firstborn is the Lord's and the first fruit is the Lord's, the first city is God's property.
Oh,
My camera keeps going out. My apologies. Don't know what's happening there. So the first is God's. And so Jericho is God's property. That is, the people sacrificed are being sacrificed to God. The animals are a sacrifice to God. They are not allowed to take the silver or the gold. It goes into the temple's treasury because it's God's property. That is why at the end there is a curse that Joshua pronounces. Cursed before the Lord be anyone who tries to build the city of Jericho. The cost of the firstborn shall lay its foundation. The cost of his youngest shall set up its gates.
So God has a bunch of dead bodies, huh?
So this is seen as a sacrifice in God's property. And if you want to take God's property, you have to sacrifice your own firstborn.
Uh-huh.
There we go. Camera's back. All right. So this is slaughter, but it's on behalf of God, God's property, which is why the heavenly host is there to help them along. What do you all think of this being kind of God's payment for all of this?
Well, the Israelites certainly should have been happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I guess it would show their true faith too, to get rid of everything and show it, give it to God. I guess it would probably help with that.
Because I mean, that's the logic of the first fruit sacrifice in like an agricultural sense. I was thinking about it the other day. I have both a raspberry and a blackberry bush in my backyard, and the first fruits are coming in, and it's like, and I've picked the first ones that are ripe, and part of me is like, I'm picking these, but like if it was in a classical sense, those would be God's offering, and the rest of the fruit is mine. But you have to trust that the rest of the fruit is going to come in if you're going to basically destroy and not eat the first of it.
You know, it's a very weird idea, but I think that it wasn't just Israel that had this idea.
Correct.
So, but I mean, they were doing sacrifices other places, only they were worse. They were killing adult women and things like that. But it just seems like, why would we imagine a God like that? I mean, it's just so.
So that is a good question. Kind of going back to some of our initial ones. So the first question is this fact, propaganda, or folklore? And we know it's not fact because the archaeology doesn't line up. So this is more in the realm of this story likely didn't happen the way at least it's told. Jericho was breached, the city was destroyed, something happened, we know that. So why tell this story this way? What does this say about God? What does this say about the people? And why are they envisioning God this way? Why put this story together this way?
Well, if you look at this, at how the story unfolds and what the result is, it clearly has nothing to do with the military operations of besieging a city. I mean, the whole story is meant to show God's power, not the armies, so that's the reason I would think they told it that way.
Yeah.
God's power is in wiping people out that aren't.
So I would say, think of this in a different way. So first of all, this is one of the times where we have to remember, by comparison, our world is surprisingly lacking violence. I know sometimes that's hard to believe with like random shootings and like the wars that are happening, and like it seems like the world is falling apart today, and yet there is so much less violence than there was. And so armies came and conquered. That was a common experience, and you hoped that your lord could protect you, especially if you are a peasant. If you are one of the people that every morning when the gates opened, you walked out into a field and you hoped if anyone showed up, you could make it back to the city in time. So the Lord could shut the gates and there'd be a military there to protect you. You would hope that if you are a shepherd in the field, that you could make it back to a city so you could be safe. So in that mindset, where you basically the only thing you have to protect you is maybe a pitchfork, maybe just a staff to hit someone with, in that worldview, why does this story matter? What does it say about a God who does this if you are a peasant?
Well, I think it's a very unifying thing to do with a group. I mean, they're sort of protecting each other in a way. It's a community is a very strong feeling, I think, among people. And when they have other people that are with them, it's unifying. They're one.
Yeah. A unity factor, yeah. So I think the other thing to keep in mind of why this is an important story is, while we have this kind of grand notion of the nation of Israel, because we identify with them because of how our stories are written, in the ancient world, this is like a small town in Wyoming bragging that their God is stronger than your God. Like, Israel is a backwater place for the ancient world. It did not have good technology. It was a bunch of hillbilly bumpkins, is how they were perceived by the rest of the world. They didn't have military prowess. They had no economic pressures of the surrounding areas. They were this little bitty kingdom that was scrappy, quite frankly. And what mattered is that it didn't matter if the people were strong. It didn't matter if they had chariots. It didn't matter if they had a standing army. It didn't matter how strong they were, because their God would defend them.
Hmm.
Their God can take down a walled city. It doesn't matter if all they had was just like the most basic of weapons, which sometimes are like sticks, sharpened sticks and pitchforks, or like you can take a sharpened stick and put a flint blade on the end of it and you have a spear. A spear is, like, in the ancient world, one of the most common weapons. Not a sword, a spear. But it didn't matter how good your weapons were, because that was a non-issue. And that is the point of the story, is that it's God's power, not theirs, which matters for a small backwater nation filled with a bunch of peasants. So how does it change if you imagine yourself as that peasant hearing this story, hearing that your strength doesn't matter because God's strength matters? Does it make it more palatable?
It makes you hope that it's true.
You're sitting on.
Which I think religion often is, or fear of God, or belief in God. You know, you sort of hope it is true.
Well, I'm thinking about when I was a child, and I read this or heard this story. I thought, wow, it is so important, so wonderful, such a wonderful story. I feel strong myself, even though I'm all by myself. Sort of like it's a very strengthening story, I think.
Yeah.
Feel good when you hear it.
Yeah, because in that mindset, you're not thinking about the people being sacrificed. You're thinking that, like, God can fight for me. So I think it's different than when this kind of story is read by, we are Americans and we think of our own context, and we have the largest, most well-funded military in the world. The story reads very differently in that context. So we often, like, one of the things that I hear more talked about is the question of, like, when is war justified? Because we have strength and power and machinery. We have some of the best technology when it comes to those things. The question is different, and it reads, that's why there's not always a one-to-one comparison of, like, should we apply this idea to our context today? Because they were not the empire with the best weapons and things. They were a small, tiny backwater nation that needed encouragement. So how do you take some pieces of the story without other pieces of this story? I think.
Well, I just read an article about the high suicide rate in the service in the Army. And, I don't think, I think a lot of the soldiers don't have a sense of purpose. They don't feel like God is at their back. They don't see the point of what they're doing. They're exhausted. That wasn't true back then. I think they probably, knowing that God was working with them, that might have helped, but maybe they never occurred to them to kill themselves.
I think it was a little bit
suicide, I think, than die in battle. Now, it does not appear to be. I don't know if that happens in Israel. Probably not, but it certainly happens here.
One of the things of modern technology is we are now more distant from violence, which has some of that existential problems. Right. Where in the ancient world, like, if you had to go to battle and you, if Babylon came and you were a farmer in the field, guess what? You get thrown a weapon and you are now a soldier. Congrats.
Right,
It doesn't
right.
matter if you have training, and you are going to be either face to face with someone you kill or face to face when they kill you. And that is very different now with warfare done by computer screens.
Right.
And you don't have to look people in the face.
Mhm.
And we've slowly gotten weaponry that separates us. And I think that adds different problems.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's not to say that people were not traumatized by ancient warfare too. Like they were. It just manifests differently and there is a higher death rate.
Mhm.
So very different context, but is it weird to say that with all the nuance we're reading into the story, there's a certain point where I actually think the Sunday school takeaway is probably what was intended with this story. It's something to make people feel strong when they feel weak.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And isn't it always true that we want the underdog to win?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know we're a little bit over time. The one last factoid that I'll give you all is we see that Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all that belong to her, they make it out of the city.
Mhm.
And the verse 25 says, but Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belong to her, Joshua spared. Her family has lived in Israel ever since. So her legacy continues. They like know evidently Rahab's family to this day. Which I mean she gets worked into the royal bloodline, so but we do hear a conclusion on her story that her bargain was honored. And one of the reasons why they separate her out, they don't just let her stay in the city, is because the city is sacrificed to the Lord, and so they need to get her out of the city so she is not. The term that I was reading is harem, which I don't know this for a fact, but it may be associated or have a cognate of harem, which is a set apart it is a protected place in the castle. We have very sexualized versions of what a harem was that is very inaccurate, but harem is something that is sanctified to the Lord. And so Rahab needed to be separated out so she was not considered part of it. And one of the readings or one of the additional notes say that one of the issues is if you take anything that is harem, then you yourself become harem. And so if you were to have taken any of the gold of Jericho, you then would have been sacrificed along with Jericho. So that's why no touchies. Don't touch the stuff that's God's, because then you are also God's property and you don't want that.
No, no.
I wonder if the rest of, I wonder if she went straight. I mean, was she still going to be a prostitute?
We don't know. We're just told that she was safe and that her family exists today. So anyways, any final thoughts for this section for today? All right. Well, shall we pray ourselves out?
Mhm.
Gracious and loving God, while we may struggle with the violence in today's story about the fall of Jericho, what we hold on to is the fact that you are a God that fights for us. That even when we are feeling weak, that we are not weak because you are with us. Even when we struggle, we don't have to do it alone. You give us community to build us up. So when we can't do things, hopefully other people can fill in those gaps. You give us the hope that in Jesus Christ, that even when we can't live up to our ideals and the best that we can be, you do that for us and you forgive us when we don't. And when we lose our way, we trust that you bring us back with your love that can conquer all things. So may you topple the walls that we build inside our hearts that keep us stubborn and away from each other. May you topple the walls that keep us separated from neighbors and those in the community that we are meant to connect with. And help us, as always, look to you for guidance and the strength when we feel like we have none left. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mhm.
All right, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.
Yay,
Thank you.
Fred.
You too. Thank you.